Hello people and welcome back. Today's video is going to be slightly different to my usual type of video. As you guys who have been subbed to me for a very long time will know, I am very vocal about my distaste to the porn industry. And I know a lot of you from the DMs that I receive every day are just happy that there is this newfound space where you're safe, I guess, to voice your opinions about how the porn industry and OnlyFans is essentially affecting a lot of women and affecting your relationships, and I get even DMs from young men saying how it's affecting them. And I really appreciate having an audience where we are pretty much all on the same page about this and having a safe place for us to voice our opinions about something that these days it feels like we're not allowed to voice because loads of people are very I guess accustomed to saying that the porn industry is fine and great and let's just all pretend it's not terrible. So today I have a guest on who I absolutely love. I first discovered her through her TED talk about the porn industry. Her name is Gail Dines. I'm going to let her introduce herself in the video. But yeah, it's a very chatty video. If that's not your type of thing, just watch the next one, I guess. But I do encourage you to watch because it's very nice to have more perspective from somebody who is an expert and has, you know, put years of research into the topic. So I think, yeah, it's less of me talking today and more of someone else. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Gail Dines, although please call me Gail. I have been doing this work on pornography for well over 30 years. I was a professor for over 30 years, studying this, writing about the porn industry, lecturing, presenting all over the world. And then I became a professor emeritus, which means you step down from teaching. And I was lucky enough to be at a conference of women philanthropists. And when they heard me talk, this doesn't happen twice in a lifetime, they offered me money to start a non-profit.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I couldn't turn it down. So it was kind of a fork in the road. And I decided that I would start this non-profit called Culture Reframed. And our mission is to basically stop the harms of pornography on young people and the sexual, behavioral, cognitive, physical harms of pornography. We build programs for parents, for teachers, for medical professionals, and it's called Culture Reframed with a D on the end. And if you just go to culturereframed.org, you'll be met with a ton of resources, videos, books, you know, ideas of where to continue the conversation. So that's what I do.
It was your video, your TED Talk video that I came across at the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what introduced me to you. Because prior to that, I've always struggled to find people with like-minded opinions. It's something that I kind of discovered being kind of anti-pornography is quite rare these days. So finding people with like-minded opinions is very nice, especially seeing people with such experience and knowing so much that you know and how you've been teaching it for so long is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on, because so often when I come to talk about my distaste to pornography, I'm always met with it, I guess, being like, people think it's just my opinion. It's like, oh, that's just your opinion on it. That's just your take. And you must have had kind of bad experiences and you're biased because X, Y, Z. That's always what I've been told. So I think what I've been trying to do to kind of, I guess, have that extra level of understanding about the industry is researching and reading loads of books. So I obviously had a look through your book. And I haven't read the entire thing, but I had, in the time we've had,
not something to read in one sitting.
Yes. No, definitely. Yeah, it's any book like that. I find I have to kind of sit back and take a break and just.
Totally. When I was writing it, it was the same thing. I mean, I had to sit back and take a break and get my head out of the porn because, of course, I was watching a lot of porn too. And sometimes it was too much. I remember sometimes where I'd see something, I'd end up like weeping in the corner of my office, you know. So, no, I'm really glad you asked me on here because it's really important to understand that those of us who are opposed to pornography actually come from the radical feminist position, which has been arguing against pornography as a form of misogyny and violence against women for well over 40 years. I think what you're met with is a culture where pornography has become normalized. It has become the wallpaper of young people's lives. And you also met with a lot of people, especially men who use, and that's going to get them going because they think you want to take their away from them, which really upsets them. So it's why you're coming across this is the radical feminism in a way was overtaken by this kind of third wave neoliberalism, where it was all about empowerment, empowerment, and empowerment. And when I joined the feminist movement, we never used that term. We used the term liberation, which is very different because liberation is a collective uh, reality, not an individual. So, I mean, I feel like an extremely empowered woman, right? Lecture, I've got skin privileges, etc. I'm an educated woman. But that doesn't mean anything for the most oppressed of women, right? And that's what radical feminism is about, is that if there's just one woman in the world who's oppressed, and of course that's not true because most women in the world are oppressed, then you fight for her. And I think the key form of oppression today is pornography. I think it delivers to men's brains via the penis a very crisp and succinct ideology that women are worthless, or as they like to say in pornography, dumpsters, or bitches, or whores, or you name it, they call them that. And I think you're really fighting this pushback because a lot of young women have got no history of understanding the anti-porn movement and specifically the role that radical feminists played in making this an issue. And I think, you've all been kind of gaslighted by the porn industry. You really have. I mean, it's a big mindfuck what the porn industry has done to young people. So that's why I imagine being your age and, I have my own colleagues, my friends who we all grew up in this movement. You don't have that.
Yeah.
You don't have a community.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I think a lot of young women deal with is I have a lot of messages on a day-to-day basis where they've come across my content and they say, I share the same opinions as you, I'm completely on the same page as you, but then I have a lot of people say, how do you go about talking about this? How do you, I guess, make a change is the biggest question I always get, because so many people are like, I completely respect that you're vocal about it, but like, what is this going to do? Like, it seems like a losing battle. So I think that's a really interesting point, because I think so many people think, well, if it's such a big problem and we're so far behind in getting other people to understand why is such a big problem, I think a lot of people genuinely, especially my age, they just think, well, what's the point now? We're too far gone. So I guess what do you think is a good starting point for a lot of people who have the same opinions as me, but I guess kind of feel lost with it? Because I think that's how I felt when I was younger, especially when I didn't have anyone to look up to. I was always just like, this is how I feel, but I'm the odd one out.
Well, it's difficult. I mean, let's be honest. I'm not going to sort of sugarcoat this. And there's the micro way and there's the macro way. So first of all, let me say the view on pornography is beginning to shift. There's no question that we're getting more and more emails from younger women, especially, who are absolutely fed up with this world that men have created. We call that obviously patriarchy. I also get a lot of emails from young men who kind of understand what they're doing to themselves and they've got no one to talk to. I mean, when I go and speak in a college or a high school, it's like a ha-ha moment for these students because they feel like you, but nobody's put it into words. And when I talk about the role that pornography plays in turning men into batterers and rapists and johns and all of that, and the way that pornography delivers messages of misogyny and patriarchy, and that what men are doing, boys doing to themselves, is they are really destroying their capacity to build authentic sexual relationships. That's what pornography does. Because why would you want an intimate, connected relationship with a whore or a slut or a dumpster? Because that's what women are. This is where you get the incel movement as well, because they think these women are fucking every man except him. So, what's wrong with him? And of course, it's her fault. So porn gives an extremely distorted view of women and of men. It gives a distorted view of what looks like. I mean, if you were going to really take a video of two people having sex without like the warmth of violence and degradation. If you were just to watch a video of two people having sex, you'd probably fall asleep within 10 minutes. It's pretty, but the fun of having sex is having sex,
Yeah.
right? Watching it gets pretty boring. Of course, most of the men are masturbating to it and the boys, but you have to keep upping the ante and that's what you see. You go into Pornhub and you'll see women being choked with a penis, you'll see women being strangled, which we now know from studies has become a very common sex act in young people. Well, I won't call it sex act, an act of violence that has been sexualized. There was a study done and they interviewed first year women students in university and they asked them about their last sexual experience, not their whole life, their last, and 1 in 3 had been strangled. Right. So first of all, this is extremely dangerous. It's called non-fatal strangulation, but it can cause death. It can cause a stroke. It can cause a heart attack. It can cause brain damage. You name it. And the idea that somehow taking the air, the breath out of someone, denying them the capacity to breathe, is
Yeah.
it's really the way in which all of this is distorted. And I want to say here too, if you have men listening, is that often as a feminist, we're thought of as man haters. And I have to say, feminists are actually men's best friends. We're the only ones who believe in the capacity of men to be equal to women, to be able to connect and have relationships and intimacy. You know, the real man haters is pornography. Nowhere are you going to see images of men that are so hateful, because in pornography, a man is cruel. He's out to destroy a woman, debase her, destroy her body, and then move on to the next one,
Yeah.
and the next one, and the next one. I mean, it's kind of hookup culture gone awry, pornography. So men, you know, the pornographers really construct an image of men that is completely hateful. Now, their image of women as well, of course, is hateful because, you know, if you think of women in the pornographic framework and these, as they call them, why would you give a slut equal pay? Why would you give her equality in the legal system, in the medical system, in any? I mean, what you do with a slut is you fuck her and you move on. You don't see it as a human being. And you know, we have over 40 years of empirical research coming from psychology, sociology, increasingly neurobiology, that shows that you cannot walk away from pornography unchanged. Even just once it shifts you, but we know that men and boys don't use it once. You know, studies say that often boys come across it around the age of 11. When I say that, people tell me no, it's earlier.
Yeah.
That they've often dealing with boys of 9 or 10 who have, and you don't just come across pornography, by the way. The porn industry is building algorithms to actually target boys. So they are a very predatory industry. They will do whatever it takes because, you know, most predatory industries like alcohol and tobacco, they make their money off those who are addicted. The vast majority of money comes from those who are addicted. Now, addiction to pornography, we know is a real thing from the neurobiological research. We know it's the extreme end of the continuum of effects, but all along this continuum, there are effects. And you think of this like 9, 10, 11-year-old boy who's never seen anything what he thinks is of sex before. There's no really good sex education. They don't talk about pornography much anywhere in the world. And I live in the United States where sex education is a joke. And what you need to talk about in sex education is the real life of young people. Right? It's got to talk about social media, it's got to talk about hypersexualization, it's got to talk about pornography, and they don't get that. And so in that absence of good education and knowledge, in comes the porn industry to fill the vacuum. And so think of this, you know, young boy who looks for pornography or stumbles across it. And it's kind of traumatic to be thrown into images of women being strangled, choked, you know, penetrated in a way that's going to cause her serious damage. We know that with women in the porn industry, that they often get anal prolapses, their anuses literally drop out of their body. They get all sorts of STIs. Their bodies are wrecked. Most women can only stand 3 months in the industry, and not to mention the post-traumatic stress disorder that comes with it. So this is the world this young boy is thrown into. How is he going to make sense of it? Because he's aroused, you see. So he's aroused, he's ashamed, he's scared, he's disgusted, and again, he's aroused and he's motivating to it. So he's got a kind of toxic stew in his stomach, which I would argue is traumatic for him. And when you traumatize a generation of boys, you lay waste to a generation of girls here because they go out wanting to do the same thing. You know, we know that the more they watch pornography, the more they want to do porn sex, the more likely they are to go to prostituted women. The less likely they are to be able to sustain an erection because they're used to this hardcore, you know, in your face, violent pornography. So it's like asking a whiskey drinker to go back to beer. It's boring. Yeah. And his dopamine receptors have gotten used to this. So what happens is he's bored. And as I said, needs to up the ante. And then they often end up in these fetish sites like king.com or looking at child sexual abuse images. That's another way. Therapists have said another way they go. They sometimes end up being the family pets as well. Now, again, these are extreme. So let's go to the non-extreme. And all of those who are listening say, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Well, maybe not. But you're on a journey here with the pornography. You don't know where you're going to end up. And that could be where you end up. Believe me, I have interviewed many men in prison who told me they never in a million years thought they would end up with child pornography. Right? And yet, that's where they were, in prison for downloading child pornography and raping a child. So I think your generation has to be angry at what's going on. There has to be, the rage that's boiling inside. And again, you have to be careful with rage because it can destroy you. So it has to be a controlled rage. But the porn industry has stolen your sexuality. It's stolen it from the boys and men. It's stolen it from the girls and women, and all to make a profit. That's all it's about, is making a profit. So I like to see rage, especially in women, because that's what moves mountains. And when you talk to women, and I remember, I taught young women and men for 30 odd years, and they would come into the class and, I'd hear the pro side and the so-called ethical porn and all of this. I tell you, by week 3, they were ready to tear down the industry.
Yeah.
They were so enraged by what it was doing. So there needs to be really good education and activism around pornography. And I think that's where you feel hopeless, because we can do it. We can do these things. And one of the biggest things we need to do is regulate this incredibly unregulated industry.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's something that I found really interesting is a lot of people, the defense I've heard since I was younger and always had the opinions that I've had but never kind of knew why, the defense of the industry has always been, well, it's just fantasy, it's not real. And I used to kind of think, okay, as a younger, naive person with no actual knowledge on the industry, to me, if someone says, well, it's just fantasy, or all men do it, it's just how it is. I always used to think,
boys,
yes, exactly. I was always like, okay, you just don't think further than that when you're younger. But it's funny how even people now, I have comment on my videos, and these kind of pro arguments are usually centered around that it is just fantasy and they're actors. But I find it really interesting that anybody can kind of uphold those views, because the amount of people I have emails quite regularly actually from a lot of men, like you said, saying, I don't know who to turn to, I don't know who to talk to, I've been struggling for a really long time and I don't know how to stop. And I find it really interesting that people would even consider, I guess, me as somebody to come to who, I like to think I can talk about it for a really long time, but at the end of the day, I'm not an expert. But I think to me that highlights how little kind of resources that there are for people that are struggling or do recognize that they've got an issue with their consumption. Or even just, I have young women all the time message me and say, I'm with my partner and he won't stop watching, and he says that if I don't like it, then I can go somewhere else. And I get all of these messages, and I just think how people can still say that it's just fantasy and it's not affecting anybody's life in real time is quite insane. That's because I really don't understand how people manage to, I guess, just choose to turn a blind eye. And I have to tell myself that's what it is, because there are, like you said, there's been so much research, so much evidence, but still people, even people that aren't creators in that industry. I just think what you must be using pornography yourself to be defending it, because otherwise, like,
Why would you?
yeah,
Why would
what's
you?
the point? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this idea, who's it fantasy for exactly? Not the women whose bodies and are being wrecked, who's getting trauma. It's not for the guy who's jerking off, because that's real semen coming out of his penis, right? That's not fantasy. You don't have a separate brain for fantasy, that you have one brain. And in fact, we know from actual brain scans how the brain lights up in men when they look at pornography. So the idea that it's fantasy is just a way to kind of dodge the argument, refuse to take on the issue. Because if you do, then it's a lot to take on. It's a lot for the men and boys who use it, and for the young women who. Now, I doubt you're really going to find a man who's not used pornography. I mean, you'd have to be living in a cave or something. So what I would say is that if you're with somebody, and it has to be someone who's worth putting time into, right? You don't want to start, if you're going to try and change every single man you meet, you're going to be exhausted. So you have to put a lot of energy into the man or boy that you are going to have some connection to. And there's lots of videos up there by me, by people like Jackson Katz, who's a pro-feminist man, and they have to begin to educate themselves as to what's wrong with pornography. Now, if they continue to ignore you and use pornography, then you have to walk away.
Yeah.
They're right. Go and find someone else, because if they're going to continue it, you cannot be in a relationship, a really, connected. And I'm not saying that every single relationship you're in, you have to lead to partnering for life, but you want something out of a relationship, right? Other than orgasms, which you probably don't get if he's using pornography anyway. You probably even don't get that. So I think women have to be more picky with the men they hang out with, and men have to listen to women. They have to listen to those women who say to them, this really concerns me. And these women might not have the words to express it, but it's not on them to be men's educators. We clean up after them, and they make a lot of messes, men, whether it's in the home or in the world. We say, I'm so sick of mopping up after men's messes, and that's what women do really well. But we're sick of it. So men have to start mopping up after their own messes and get educated and learn. And, I am the mother of a son. And I can tell you, the idea that men are born porn users is ridiculous. Do not tell me that beautiful little boy of mine, he's now a man, of course, was born a porn user. And in fact, one of the most powerful ways that me and my husband sort of brought him up was to make feminism his first language. So from a very early age, talking about his body and what it means to have boundaries and borders. We didn't obviously start talking about pornography. We talked at 4 years old. We talked earlier about, boundaries, bodies. And, men are taught to sort of view themselves in a way that as many women they can fuck, that makes them more manly. Well, no, it does not. It makes them more manly in a toxic way. But they have to rethink who they are, what they want out of life, what connections they want. And women have to really refuse to be with men. I mean, look, can you imagine a person of color partnering with somebody who likes to read racist material? It would be unthinkable. I'm Jewish. Would I be with somebody who liked to look at anti-Semitic material or read Mein Kampf? It would be unthinkable. So why is women the only group that are constantly with men who hate them, and they're taught to hate them through pornography and the manosphere and the gaming sites and all of those? So there's a lot to be done, but it is very important to know you are not inventing the wheel here. The wheel was invented by radical feminists over the last 30 to 40 years. There's so much stuff out there about this. So you don't have to invent the wheel. It's there. You just have to basically be committed to educating yourself. And very importantly, and I think this is what you provide here, is a community of young women who can talk to each other with honesty about what their lives are like. I mean, in my classes, because it was mainly women, they would get to speak about things they'd never spoken about before, about their childhood sexual abuse, about the rapes they had in college, about being battered, all of these things. And if the men were not listening, I'd turn to them in the class and say, look, you are in a very privileged position at this moment. You have real women talking to you about their real lives. You respect that, because you're not going to hear this from most women. And this is what men need to start doing, is listening to women and what happens. Not women who endorse the industry,
Yes.
because they too have drunk the Kool-Aid. They've
Yes.
basically taken on, the third wave empowerment, feminist, ethical crap that's
Yes.
being fed all the time.
Yeah.
So, and I do know your group intimately after teaching for so long, and I didn't grow up like that. We didn't grow up with men like that, and unfortunately, this defines your life if you're heterosexual, and if you're and what I had a lot of gay men in my classes. And what was interesting is when they became anti, they too couldn't find a good man. So the straight women students and the gay men were in the same position. I can't find a man who's not a user on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But I think that's your job. Or you give up on men.
Yeah.
You give up on men, you go with women, or if you don't want to be with women, actually you be with them in other ways.
Yeah.
But and we live in communes together, and we support each other, and we develop this notion that we call sisterhood, where we do support each other. And that's what's lacking from the so-called faux feminism that you're being fed.
Yeah, I think with, like you said about kind of deciding just not to be with these men that are, deciding openly to watch, despite, being educated, despite knowing why there is an issue with it. I think, me personally, I've had relationships where I've kind of got into the relationship and said, this is my boundary. I don't want to be with somebody who watches pornography. And I see so many women trying to set that boundary with that partner, and either being met with, yeah, that's fine, and then later down the line they find out that they were doing it behind their back, or they just say, that's controlling, and I want to do that, it's normal, all of that kind of stuff. So I think the problem is, a lot of time women know what they want. They know the type of man that they want. And in my experiences, I've had it. No man has ever said to me, no, I'm not going to listen to what you want, and I'm going to watch it anyway. Usually I've had it where they say, yeah, that's fine, and then I find out however many months down the line, and then I'm like, okay. And then I think that's the difficulty, especially for a lot of young people, or especially a lot of vulnerable young people, who end up kind of thinking that that's their person, and they're already into the relationship. So when they make a mistake in their eyes by watching pornography here and there, I think a lot of people let it go. They say, you know what, never again, and then if you do it again, I'll leave, and then they do it again, and then you're in that cycle. And I think that's what I hear about mostly from especially young girls. It's always like, oh, he said he wouldn't do it again, and then he did. And I do think, I always say to my friends when they come to me and say that they've had issues with their boyfriend watching, I always say, if you've had one conversation and he's done it again, you need to leave. He's not going to stop. He will not stop. If he's heard you out, he knows your problem with it, he knows the problem with the industry, and he's made that active decision, then he is not, he's not going to stop.
I just think for women, you cannot give up this. If you really want to partner with a man, this is something you have to do. And our rage should also be at the industry.
Yeah.
What right do they have to come in and hijack the sexuality of entire generations? And in a way, when you think about policymakers, where the hell are they? I often lecture to, senior medical professionals, policymakers, all around the world. And I just want to say, where the fuck have you been all these years? Why have you left it to young people to have to figure this out? And in my lectures, I say, to the students, has anyone helped you navigate this new world that you're in of pornography? It's not so new anymore. And they say no. And we're drowning. We're drowning. We don't know what to do. We don't know who to speak to. We don't know who to ask. And this is the world, and I don't want it, but there's nothing like you. What else is out there? Well, there's a lot out there. There is a lot out there. And I think men need to start having support groups and consciousness raising sessions about what it's done to them. Just as feminists did in the 60s and 70s, was to get together and just talk about your experiences without shame. Without shame. I don't want to shame men for this. Because that's a useless emotion to have, because you will not do anything if you're deeply shamed by it. What you need to understand is you have been manipulated by an industry and a culture, and that you have to begin to resist this. That's resistance on a micro level in your own life and on a macro level, organizing against the industry, protesting all of these things, insisting that the schools you're in and the universities you're in offer courses that give you knowledge about these things. I mean, and stop all this faux feminism of empowerment and liberation and all of that stuff that they argue that, gives women sexual agency.
Yeah.
I mean, and these are often said by women who would never be in porn. Let me be very clear about that, right? That's for, it's not for me, but it's for them over there. Yeah. Somehow, a whole class of women over there who just happen to love to be, degraded and debased on film so that their images are out everywhere for all these men and boys to masturbate to. It's a lie. Women don't want that. Women in pornography are often the poorest of the poor. It is disproportionately women of colour. It is disproportionately war refugees and environmental refugees. It is disproportionately women who were sexually abused in childhood. This is what we know about the women in the industry. Do you really want to support such a corrupt, bankrupt industry? And this is not coming from a moral position. This is coming from a deeply held political feminist position.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think kind of holds a lot of women back, especially when it comes to being vocal about the industry, is it is met with this kind of attitude of, well, if you have that opinion on the industry, you must not. So I mean, I get it all the time. You must not support the workers in it. Every single time I'm vocal about my opinions on it, it's always, you hate the people in the industry, you hate the women in the industry, and you
the opposite.
And it always baffles me, and it's quite, I think, upsetting, especially when you spend so much time being vocal about something, because it truly upsets you. It's something that you think about every day, and I think that's the biggest thing. Once you're kind of aware of it and you've researched and you spend so much of your time reading about it, you can't escape it. You're so, I guess, hyper aware. Everything you see around you in the media, you see how much it's
you know what, you take off the blinkers you've been wearing and suddenly it's everywhere. You see it everywhere. I mean, once you've got that consciousness, it's never going to go away unless you have a lobotomy. It's always going to be there. So the idea that we are against the women in the industry is so ludicrous. I mean, I work with so many women who've exited the sexual exploitation industries, and it's because we can't stand what's happening to them as well. And to call it sex work is like to basically deny the reality of the women in those industries. It's not sex work, it's sexual exploitation. And that term sex work, was invented by the porn lobby, the prostitution lobby, to dignify what men do. Right? It was to dignify what men do, because she's got doing sex work just like, other work. So what's wrong with it? So, no woman I know who has exited the sexual exploitation industries, whether it be prostitution or stripping, ever refers to it as sex work.
Yeah.
Right? She might while she's in the industry, because you have to psychologically somehow build a barrier that stops you really dealing with the horrors of what's happening to you on a regular basis. But once out and able to reflect on it, I have never heard any woman who's come out of there saying, well, I had a great time. It was so liberating. I felt so much agency, being pummeled by these guys. And it's often a couple of guys or three guys at once doing this. Who wants that to happen to their body? A lot of this on a powerful level is just a bit of empathy. Watch her and think, how is she feeling? And when it's over, she has to get up off that bed or off that floor, covered in ejaculate, bruised everywhere, take a shower, deal with it, and then get up the next day and do the whole thing again. Yeah. And again and again. Who the hell would select that as a choice?
Yeah, well, I think people talk about empowerment, and it often makes me think kind of why do you think that that is empowering, for example? And I think for a lot of people it's truly because you're brought up in a society where that's what's expected of you as a woman.
Mhm.
So I think you do naturally lean into seeing, I guess, these scenes and seeing what happens, and think, well, that's what men want. That's sexy. So that's, if I act that way, that's sexy and that's empowering to me because men want me. And I think that's where people get confused, because I always talk about this, like, how can you say that what, seeing somebody, for example, doing a gangbang who is it's having sex with multiple men, and it's
It's being
yeah,
by
yes,
multiple
and
men.
it's aggressive and rough, and she's being spat on, or she's being urinated on. How can you talk about that as empowering? And usually the answer I get is, well, she's choosing to do it, and
How do they know that?
yeah,
They have no
exactly.
idea. They don't
Yep,
know anything about her life. They've never interviewed
yep,
her. What on earth do they know?
yep. And I find it
And
really interesting too, because when you talk about, oh, because I always get the same thing as, some women like that, some women are into that, and I think no woman on this earth is born naturally thinking, yes, I want to have sex with multiple, I want to be, as you said, be raped by multiple men.
I want to end with a story I think about my son, because I think other men should hear this. What do you think? I think
Yes,
to how it's done.
yeah,
I want to sort of talk about how different it is when you bring up a boy with a feminist analysis who understands eventually as he grows into a man within. I always, of course, use the example of my son. So, as I said, we sort of scaffolded talks about body limits and all of that. And then we would talk about what it means to be a man in a sexist society. Words like sexism and misogyny were coming out of his mouth at the age of 4 or 5. He understood it. And in fact, it got to the point where he would see things before I did. We would be walking past a billboard or something. He'd say, "Oh, look how sexist that is," and I hadn't like seen it. Um, and then when he was around 10, 11, and it was going to get to the part where it's going to be everywhere, I basically said to him, "Look, I can't follow you around to see if you're going to look at porn. And you know what? You don't want me to follow you around either. And you might find porn, somebody might show you, I don't know, but it's going to happen. But I want you to think about something before you actually choose to look, because you know what? You have a choice whether you look or not. So I want you to think about your sexuality. And we don't know if you're gay, straight, but we don't know. But you know what? You'll grow into your sexuality, because it will reflect the wonderful person that you are. But I said, if you look at, you are handing over your sexuality to the pornographers before you even own it. Do you really want these predatory capitalists, we use words like that in our home, to have ownership of this? And we would have discussions and stuff. And the important thing for women here who sort of are looking at how to talk to their sons is not to give long lectures. They say in this, do 100 1-minute conversations, not 100-minute conversations. If people here who are listening are looking at how to talk to kids about pornography, you should go on our website, culturereframed.org, and go to the parents program. We have a whole program for parents. So what happens is, and I like to sort of end by saying what happens when you bring up a boy like, and of course it wasn't just us, all our friends, that's all he mixed with, our friends who were the same man, had the same ideas. And he was in college, and he was going out with his friends, and he found out that they were going to a strip club, not a bar. He thought they were going to a bar, but it was a strip club with a bar. And he turned back. And I said to him, "Why did you turn back?" What I asked him. And I thought I was going to get the mom speech of violence against women, blah, blah, blah. And it was really interesting what he said. He said, "You know what, Mom? I only have this one body to live in. And I don't think I could have stood to live in this one body if I would have exploited a woman." And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what you want. It's his moral compass, right? I helped lay the groundwork, as did my husband, but it was him. It was him. And that's what we need for men and boys. It needs to become who they see themselves as. And this will have an impact on the way they treat girls and women. But we must not beg men and boys to change. We must demand it.
Yeah.
We demand it. We do not beg for it. And we demand it with all forms of protest and being a feminist activist and writing about it and calling boys and men out who are, well, not boys because they're young and they need, support along. But there has to be a collective movement where we say we've had it. And it's going to come from your generation and the next one younger than you, because they have had it. I can tell you from speaking all over the world, they've had it. And women are often taught not to get angry, and if they do, they turn it inward and it becomes depression. Get angry, right? Anger is what makes movements, not the crazy anger where you walk around hitting things and everything.
Yes.
Your sense of self has been violated, whether it's through racism, sexism, poverty, to be enraged at a system that has put you in this place. You did not ask for this. This is what you were born into. And now you have a right to reclaim the society that you were born into. This is your basic human right, certainly for women and also for boys and men as well. So we are not begging anybody to change. We are demanding it. Absolutely. And you know what? To the boys and men out there who are listening to this, your life will change for the better. No question.
Yeah.
Certainly, women's and girls' lives will change for the better. We cannot live with this level of violence against women and girls. It is simply unsustainable to live with this. We cannot leave, men cannot leave in their wake all these traumatized women and girls who spend a lifetime trying to put themselves back together after they've been broken into pieces through this violence. And one of the things that we need to do as feminists is to build all these support networks for these girls and women that need to do that. Because feminism is the one place you can go where nobody will blame you, where we will be there to support. That is what it is about. I don't know what my life would have looked at without feminism. Yeah. I can't imagine who I would be as a woman, as a mother, as a partner. Who would I be? I don't know. So it's time, and men, need to be pro-feminist.
Yeah.
Absolutely crucial. And they've got women in their lives they love. Many of them love their mothers, their sisters, their grandmothers, friends and stuff. If you can't even begin to do it for yourself, do it for them. And then eventually you'll end up doing it for yourself, which is what you.
Yeah. And I think just a perfect place really just to wrap things up. I think it's interesting to see, especially a lot of boys my age and men's perceptions on what feminism is, because a lot of people, I always get some very backhanded compliments of, Katie, you're the first feminist that I've listened to that I actually can listen to. And it's like, I see what you've obviously, you misunderstand what feminism is at that point. And I think that's a big part for me, is having a channel where I talk about these things. I really do enjoy seeing people say, you've opened my eyes up to this, because I get that a lot. And it is very nice to kind of build that community. And I think when I first came across your work, I thought, this is somebody that I need to get on my channel, because I was like, my audience will really, really like her. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about this.
Oh, anytime. I'll talk anytime about this. And I do it because, first of all, given what I know after all these years research, if I don't stay as an activist, I'll go crazy.
Yeah.
Right? I can't live with what I know without doing something about it. And secondly, I'm just enraged for what your age group and the younger age group have to go through. Enraged. And, it's got to stop. It's just got to stop. And the adults have just basically been derelict in their duty to hand this kind of world to the pornographers and leave their kids to figure out how to navigate it. So, enough. We've done with this, and we're going to fight it. We're going to fight it.